Alright, so I've decided to make a tier list of all of Kanye's albums. Now, even though we've all known of Kanye and his antics for a long time now, I actually didn't take the time to listen to all of his albums until pretty recently. A couple months ago, I listened to all of his solo albums and I was like, okay, I kind of got a feel for how I feel about them. And then recently he dropped Vultures 1, so I'm like, okay, let me go back and listen to his collab albums as well. So I will be ranking all of Kanye's albums except for The Cruel Summer, because even though it is part of his discography, I do not consider it like, one of his actual albums. But that being said, I would say on the bottom of the list, unfortunately, is his gospel album, J.I.K. Now here's the thing, there is nothing wrong with gospel music in itself, and even though it's not particularly my favorite genre or genre I really care about, good music is good music no matter what themes are or whatever. The fact of the matter is, J.I.K. is just, not him at his best. Like, this music is just like, you could tell he could do way better than this. I understand your new enthusiasm, but you don't translate into the music sense. Like, I don't think any of the albums were trash, but this album is just, no, there's nothing here I need to go back to. Now, number 2, we have Ye. And this, honestly, would be worse than J.I.K. if it weren't for the fact that it had better songs on it. This album is just him being a weirdo for 7 songs. And the problem with that is, like, now you have no excuse to be this lame. But that being said, the songs on this album still show some talent, so I'm not gonna put at the bottom of the list. Number 3 is Donda 2. I'm surprised because I listened to it and I was thinking that it would be like the worst album he had, because it's like considered a demo album. Everyone's like, wow, this is trash or whatever. But no, this album, it's obviously not his best album, but it shows that this is a guy who cares about music. I don't know if I want to listen to this in public or anything, but it's still a decent album. Like, if somebody who wasn't Kanye made it, it would still be a cool, well, not cool, but it would still be a decent album. I wouldn't call it like the last 2 albums I just mentioned. Those are like borderline trash. Like, this album is cool. Like, I don't really have a problem with this album, honestly. Next we have Vultures 1. And this album is one that I'm kinda conflicted on, because even though it's not his worst album, obviously, we're past that stage, when I listened to it, it did not do anything for me. Like, yeah, there's some talent in the music, obviously, because it's Kanye, but one thing about his newer era is that you can tell he's trying to, like, ride the wave of the more modern people, which I get it. As an artist and you grow and time changes, you have to join time as it changes, that's not really a problem. But at the same time, I feel like when he's himself, when he's the one pushing culture forward, he's at his best. Whereas when he's, like, following the trend of culture, it's like, you could kind of do better than this. But at the end of the day, this is also a collab album, so we're not going to give him all the credit and all the blame, like another guy too. Next we have The Life of Pablo. This is actually the first Kanye album I listened to. When this came out, I was first getting into music, and I listened to the album front to back. When I first listened to this album, there were a couple songs I liked a lot, but at the end of the day, most of them were kind of like how I felt about Vultures 1. There were those cool songs that I really went back to, but it wasn't like a lot of the album that was that for me. I just listened to it once and I was like, I feel like this album is a little too long for what it is, and it's not a bad album at all, but again, he has done much better than this in the past. So to see him go from that to this is definitely a step down. Now we're trying to get into the actually good albums, like, unequivocally good talented albums. Next is Kids See Ghost. This album is heavily meat-ridden by all the Kanye fans, and this album is good, don't get it twisted. This album is pretty cool, but at the same time, it's like, it's only 7 songs, and it's not like his greatest magnum opus. For what it is cool, it's well composed and well everything, but I'm not too pressed about this album, honestly. When I first listened to it, obviously it's better than Ye, and I knew that when I first listened to it, but I actually never went back to it until recently. And when I listened to it again, I'm like, I feel the same way I felt when I first listened to it. Like, this is cool, but it's not going to define my personality or anything. It's just a really cool album. And that in itself is already good enough. So, even though I have a bunch of albums above this, it might be the best in their catalog. Just know that. Next, we have the first, in my opinion, really great album. Like, these are like top tier artist level albums. We have 808s and Heartbreaks. Now, as we all know, this is made in a really special time in Kanye's life, and it really reflects in his music. You can hear, like, just the changes in mind state from this album from the last ones, and it's just really interesting to listen to, like, because it's not just in the lyrical content, it's also how the production sounds. Like, the time period of when it was composed is what really adds to the feel of the album. Honestly, earlier I put this higher, but at the end of the day, a lot of how I feel about this album is like based on like just real life circumstances. So if I'm judging music by music, it is where it belongs. But just know, this album is heat. Like, this album is like, again, it'd be in most artists' top tier. Next on the list, we have the album that started it all, College Dropout. Now, this album is pretty cool. Like, the feel of it, it's cool. The impact of it, though, this is what started this man's journey in music, and this is what makes him someone who actually changed the way rap is conducted. Because he made it cool to not be a gangster. He made it cool to be someone who just wore clothes and, you know, was interested in getting money and like looking fly or whatever, and not killing people, and had problems like going to college and not wanting to do it instead of the block being too hot or something. You know, this album is just cool. Like, this album, even if it's not number one, this album is super important. Like, this album just represents a lot in the world, and it represents a lot in his life. So it has to be here. Next is Watch the Throne, and this album is just heat. I didn't see much more about it. That's two of his iconic songs in his catalog. It's just everything a collab album should be. It just, they both flow perfectly together. They both bounce off each other in the best way possible. I don't need another collab between them. I'm not saying, oh man, I'm so disappointed they don't get along anymore. I don't care about that, honestly. I'm just saying, like, the way it worked out perfectly, and that's a fact. Next, we have Donda, which I'm sure some of you may be confused as to why I have it so high up on the list, but at the end of the day, this is a complete return to form. After you drop the nonsense like JK and Ye, it's like, okay, this man clearly has the best years behind him, and that's how I was looking for a long time. And even the life of Pablo, like, people like it a lot, but I'm like, okay, that's just, it was alright, but you know, it hasn't been what it used to be. But this album really is his best album in a long time. It's not perfect, obviously, but it's so much better than what he's been doing for such a long time that it really feels like, okay, he hasn't lost it. It doesn't matter how old he gets, he can still do stuff that is impressive. He can still create a track that matters and just dominates the airwaves. He still has it in him, and it's beautiful to see that he still exists, because for a second there was kind of looking spooky, you know. Next, we have Late Registration. This album is honestly one of his best. In fact, if people consider this his best album, I'll take that, because song quality wise, it's pretty up there. One thing that's interesting about this album is just like this album and College Dropout, you can tell he's a little bitter about the whole college thing. Clearly he's rich and famous and everything, like, oh, I made it out of college, but he spent a lot of time trying to justify him not going to college by having these skits where the college graduate is a loser who just has these diplomas for no reason. And I'm not mad at it at all. It's just cool to see, like, how, you know, his mind changes depending on what he's doing at the time. So obviously here, where the Dropout like hasn't really made it yet to be the biggest star ever, he has to prove to himself and to others, like, well, no, me being a Dropout, it's cool, it doesn't matter. And stuff like that is really cool to see. Next, we have Yeezus, which this album may not necessarily be better than Late Registration. I mean, personally, I think it's better, but it's not necessarily like has better songs than it, but it's just experimentation done right. Whereas the later albums that he made were experimentation done wrong, this album is experimentation done in a way that is still high quality. And when this album came out, it was not well received, or at least it got mixed reception, which obviously looking back, everyone was just like capped out, but still, I think this album is some of his best work. This album is just him trying to do something different while actually keeping the quality up. And a lot of people do experimental music and it's lame, and they just say, well, I was experimenting, like, you know, you're not supposed to like it. At least when he made this, he made it so that was some of his best work as well. So, yeah, I'll give him props for that. Next, we have Graduation, which, you know, for a long time I felt was the best album he had, but this album is still pretty good. You all have the hurdle of it being a college dropout. You can tell that chip is off his shoulder. Now he's like, yeah, I know I'm the man. This whole album is him just feeling himself. Honestly, it's difficult to tell which is better between this and Late Registration, but at the end of the day, I think this is the perfect arc where college graduation started. This ends at a perfect arc. So, it has to be at least top 2 of his albums. And now, should come as no surprise, but his best album is My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. This album is like the renaissance of his career. Obviously, we know what was going on in his life at this time period, but to see him come back and just make the best album of his life is just remarkable. While I listen to the album, it's just, you automatically tell why you like it so much. It's just filled with some of his best songs, and it's just, and made in the most unique time of his like catalog. It's just yeah, this album, there's a reason it's like the most widely repeated album yet. So yeah, let me know how you feel about this list, and tell me your list in the comments. None of my evaluation of him as a musician has anything to do with my evaluation of him as a man. Like, that's completely separate. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and yeah, leave in the comments what you think about it. Alright guys, so some time ago I just put out the first episode of my own original series, and I hope you guys go check that out, and thank you for watching.